Starfleet Academy is 100% about male bashing, about contempt for men. Hello, I'm Kendall Bryan Hunter, and I'm author of this book, Consider My Servant Job, which is not about male bashing. It respects men, it respects women, it also respects your faith. You got questions about life, you got questions about the problem of pain, you got questions about any troubles in your life, give my book a read. You'll feel great once you've read it. So you are looking good. You who are 3 steps above average, my fan base. Like I said, I'm Kendall Bryan Hunter, and this is going to be entirely talking about Starfleet Academy and male bashing. The entire episode is about contempt for men, disrespecting men, demonizing men, diabolizing men, making men look stupid. So stop the male bashing, stop the contempt for men, and stop the insanity. But first, we have a new sponsor for this program. I have not had any sponsors, but I'd like to introduce you to our new sponsor. Our new sponsor is the Somali Quality Leering Center. No, children are everything. And with that spirit of Elijah hanging around your neck, you know it needs to be done for your children. I don't have children, but if I had children, I'd send them to the Somali Quality Leering Center. The Somali Quality Leering Center will take care of your children. They got plenty of room. Their motto is, "Let's go, Brandon." So and that's our new sponsor. I don't have sponsors. I don't want to be answerable to anyone. It's why this podcast is such a low quality. I have to pay for it out of my pocket. But you'll listen to these podcasts, and there's 5 minutes of sponsors. They'll talk for 15 minutes, and 5 minutes. It disrupts the flow. So I'm just doing this out of pocket, bare minimum. And I'm confident, since you're 3 steps above average, you understand why I'm doing this, and you'll be grateful for the bare bones, streamlined approach I'm taking. So this is going to be a little bit different. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about news. I'm just going to talk about this broad cultural, social movement about normalizing male bashing, NMB, normalizing male bashing. Misandry is another term for it. I also talk about some alternatives. I don't want to leave you in a bad funk. I'll talk about some alternatives to Starfleet Academy and to this male bashing that seems to be everywhere. One news item, though. Greenland. As you notice, my first and last names, Kendall and Hunter, are both shades of green. I happen to like the color of green. It doesn't quite go with my eyes, but certain vibrant, life-giving chlorophyll reminds you of the forest. I'm just kind of stuck with it with my last name, Hunter. So Greenland. You got any questions about Greenland? Just put it to a vote. And if anyone, just put it to a vote. Let people vote. If anyone disagrees, make an easy exit for them. I want to talk about something. It's Trump's negotiating tactic. Once I explain this, what President Trump's negotiating tactic is, it's going to be kind of like watching a little kid perform a card trick. Hey, look, I got a bunch of cards. I'll make this card disappear. Once I explain it, it's going to feel like that because you'll see what he's doing, and you're going to have a laugh at the people who just aren't aware of what Trump was doing or what Trump did with Greenland. Like I said, you're 3 steps above average, and it's a pleasure to podcast for you. So the first tactic is known as the foot in the door tactic, and you occasionally get this. I just want to make a small request. Can you do me a small favor? Oh, husbands, your wife comes with you as, honey, could you go to the store just for a few items? And you say yes, and she hands you a shopping list the size of a telephone book. Don't podcast while putting cards away. I like keeping these cards together. So that's a foot in the door tactic. Can I do a small favor and just start adding stuff on? You remember this is from The Empire Strikes Back. Darth Vader makes a deal with Lando Calrissian, and he starts changing the deal, and pray I don't change it further. That's the foot in the door. The camel nose in the tent. Pretty soon the whole camel's in there, including the smelly part. Trump used the opposite tactic. It's called the door in the face. That's when where it's a negotiating tactic, like a foot in the door. The negotiating one is where you make these outlandish complaint requests or demands for something. And for example, when you negotiate, what you do is you have your 3 items that you want. Then you add on a bunch of stuff. And so what you do is you have a 8-item list. You have the 3 that you want. This 8 stuff that you can get away with it. You can get away with it. So you have the 8 items. And you start giving away 3 items. So you're down to 5 items. And say, hey, look, I've conceded these 3 items. Can you make a move? And it works. It's a negotiating tactic. You get what you 3 want. You get the 3. You get the other items that you want. You don't get all 8. That was part of the understanding. You wouldn't get everything, and you always have these throwaway items. So you overstate your case, and you scale it back so you look reasonable, saying, hey, look, I made these concessions. What concessions can you make? President Trump did that with Greenland. He made this outlandish request. I want to buy Greenland. Secondly, he dropped hints, hey, I'm going to invade Greenland. And then we'll take it by force. And then he slowly backed off, and he got probably what he really wanted was this defense agreement and rights and such, where it's a little bit more accessible, a little more friendly to America. So I got my hoodie's a little silly. Like I said, I don't have a, I don't. If you noticed, I don't use makeup. This is just me, you, and the truth. And it worked. And so keep that in mind when you're negotiating stuff. You have a foot in this door. Once you're inside, you can start changing stuff, or you just making out something outlandish, and you come back and say, look, I made these concessions. Okay, I won't invade Greenland. Let's just have this type of agreement with them, a trade agreement or what have you. It worked. It worked in his case. And you can see it. Like I said, it's just like kind of watching a little kid perform a card trick once you know what Trump's doing. Really simple. So back to Star Trek, or the Mad Magazine used to call it Star Black. This isn't just about Star Trek. It's about sci-fi in general and broad-based male bashing, broad-based contempt for men. Star Wars, Star Trek. This happened with Doctor Who. Now, I am not a Whovian. I respect it. I grew up with, who's the third? Tom Baker. Kind of grew up with him. Pertwee is actually my favorite. I actually kind of like him. Those are the scaled back episodes where they just all happened on Earth, where he played sort of a James Bond character rather than going to strange new worlds, to coin a term. But you saw this with Stargate SG-1, especially the last 2 seasons. Having Agent Barrett as a harasser, that just didn't sit well with me. You could tell they're tweaking, they're doing messaging and agenda with that. It's male bashing. The flip side of male bashing is the toxic girl boss problem. Male bashing and toxic girl boss problem. Remember those terms. Remember those keywords. Kathleen Kennedy is probably sort of the arch crone, the arch witch behind all of this. The force is female. Leia, let's just exclude half your fan base. You say the force is female, you didn't think men were going to stand up and let our voice be heard. It's a great slogan. The force is female. It rolls off the tongue. It's an easy hashtag, but it's essentially contempt for men. Now, personally, as a follower of Jesus Christ, I forgive her. But forgiving someone doesn't mean you be enabling them. It doesn't mean that you're in denial about what's going on. Even if you forgive someone, you pray to have charity for her. But you realize there was damage done to a franchise and to men and to a lot of people. So the second thing is, as I'm talking about Strange New World, Starfleet Academy, male bashing in general, male bashing in the arts. Keep in mind these 2 frameworks I've talked about here. The first one is the level of engagement. You engage people philosophically. You engage them popularly, and you engage them personally. Now, the philosophical, that's sort of the rarefied thing. It's like an article in the Journal of American Medicine or Lancet. They have the popular version. The popular version is that's where you have kind of like these news clip segments where you have the health research by the physicians and how the news media popularly communicates it. Popular science, popular mechanics, those type of things. Shows like Cosmos or Bill Nye the Science Guy, those are popularized. Those aren't technical. But you also have, that's a nonfiction. You have fiction where these ideas are expressed through artwork. And that's where Strange New Worlds, where Starfleet Academy comes in, Star Trek, Star Wars. These are actually vehicles for philosophy. For example, you ever know Shakespeare's plays, how a lot of them take place in Italy? Romeo and Juliet, Two Gentlemen of Verona, Merchant of Venice. What Shakespeare was doing is he's bringing the Renaissance to England. Aha, you feel it now? How these ideas of the Renaissance, and he was taking them to, in fact, I can't remember one of the plays, one of his earlier ones, where he talked about how all the energy was in Italy, and through the plays, Shakespeare brought the Renaissance to England. He changed attitudes. Romeo and Juliet. Are you a Montague? Are you a Capulet? Are you Romeo or are you Juliet? Are you the tribe, the clan, or are you individuals? Well, individualism won out. I think that's the second level. Third level is the personal. That's where you talk to people. Where you're at the bus stop, the old water cooler conversations, where you're in the office break room and you're kind of talking about things. Maybe you have to do a little bit of self-censorship, and that doesn't feel right, that we're at a point where you have to censor self-censorship. But you talk to people on those levels. So this is the mid-level with Starfleet Academy. You have the academic male bashing, the gender and woman studies things, how it gets expressed through artwork, and then how things work interpersonally. Now, the second one is a social political framework, and I have different versions of it. Here's a handy way to explain it. You have the French Revolution, which is about liberty, equality, and fraternity. Then the American Revolution, life, liberty, and property. If you go for the French Revolution, liberty, equality, fraternity, you go one direction, the guillotine. You go America, life, liberty, and property, you look at your paycheck. There's demonstrations going on, but nothing like the guillotine going on here in America. And if you say there is, you're being hyperbolic, you're crying wolf. Another way to look at that is you have the French Revolution. Another way to look at it comes from Dennis Prager. He called it the American's Trinity. And he says, just look at the money. So this is a quarter, and on it says liberty at the top. Has George Washington, the father of our country. George Washington owned slaves. I forgive him for that. That's a bad example. I turned the other cheek with George Washington and his slave owning. That says, in God we trust. Then on the back, it says, E pluribus unum. You can't see it. Well, it's sort of on the, sorry. See, I did not edit that out. It makes you look stupid, but I left it in here because you're 3 steps above average, and you know that, yeah, I do stuff like this. I don't want to insult your intelligence. So it says there, and this is also a picture of Eleanor Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt's wife. You thought that Hillary Clinton was the first activist first lady. No, Eleanor Roosevelt was good. But you have these 3 things, e pluribus unum, out of many one, in God we trust, and liberty. Think about what the opposites of those are. I'm not going to fill you in. Think about those. So a third thing I need to come clear. So we talked about this broad-based male bashing expressed through Star Trek and Star Wars. We're talking about Starfleet Academy. Talked about the conceptual model, how you process things, be it the American Revolution or the French Revolution. Those take you different directions, life, liberty, and the property, or the pursuit of happiness, or liberty, equality, and fraternity. They take you different directions. Now I'm going to do a little bit of confession. I'm a fan of both Star Wars, Star Trek. I'm a science fiction fan. My parents both had an affinity to it. I'm old enough to remember the Planet of the Apes TV show. I remember watching that as a kid. I don't remember the cartoon. I do remember the live-action TV show. So we got exposed to it. It's something certainly on my mom's side of the family that I had an uncle who's into science fiction. I remember he had all these models of spaceships, and my grandfather had a shortwave radio, so very into this very friendly tech. So as you saw, that's the picture of me dressed up as Captain Kirk with my brother's tape recorder tricorder. So yeah, I'd be a friend of Trek over Star Wars, although it's a close tie. I think part of the reason as a kid we had the TV show, so it's a constant presence, every day or every week. When in syndication, you're watching Star Trek every single day. Then with the Next Generation, you're just watching it once a week. We also had at least my brother had some of the James Blish novels, the last ones in a box set with those wonderful paintings on them. About that time of the 80s, you had the Star Trek Expanded Universe novels coming out. They had some with Star Wars, but I think it came to a head with Timothy Zahn's Heir to the Empire, the series. That's where Star Wars really took off. But Star Trek, they had a lot of books out there. I wasn't a fan of the comic books, but you just had more Star Trek material. Star Wars, you had the 3 movies. Yeah, that's back when there's only 3 movies and Greedo shot first. You had the specials, the Ewoks cartoon and the Droids cartoon. You had some of the film novelizations, Splinter of the Mind's Eye, and then the original Han Solo trilogy. Of course, you had a lot of third-party materials for Star Wars, but those are always funny because they're kind of contradictory. They're not overseen by George Lucas. There's a famous discussion about canon and Star Wars, what is and isn't canon, and Lucas said it's just really the 3 films. Everything else is kind of it's just that Star Wars had more toys, but less material. At the time, I had no idea about fan fiction. That just never... I'd write a fake Star Wars story that just never occurred to me, which is kind of funny since I do that. See, with Star Trek was like Star Wars, Star Trek was like the Twilight Zone, that the episodes were smaller. They had these encapsulated ideas. Plus, there's harder science fiction. Now, both are really squishy with the science, but certainly Star Trek was more scientific looking. It felt a little bit closer to home than Star Wars, and just all the material close by. The shorter episodes, you weren't caught up. There's just more of it. So to the point, we're at point 4. Starfleet Academy is part of the Kathleen Kennedy male-bashing toxic girl boss dynamic. It's a broad, decentralized cultural movement. It's a bit like with Fembusters, the Ghostbusters Answer the Call, where it's all female remake. And is it the white man, the evil person in that? I never saw the movie. I've read the novelization, but I've seen the clips, but I haven't sat through the movie. I don't want to screw up Ghostbusters. That actually what got me into writing was Ghostbusters. You have the bait and switch problem with the rate of displacement. You see the 3rd trilogy, and it wasn't about the trio, but Rey was just Superwoman. He could do everything perfect. Mary Sue, Han Solo, Indiana Jones, Luke Skywalker were all deadbeat dads. You have this with the Multiverse of Madness, the bait and switch. You want to see a movie about Doctor Strange, and it's just a follow-up to the Scarlet Witch, an angry mom, angry woman, the toxic girl boss supreme. Especially the way that Mr. Fantastic, who's that Shiznick? What is it about? 4 minutes in a movie did it better than Pedro Pascal, and just gets wiped out quickly to the point where it's just kind of boring. It's just, okay, this is sort of a quick, gruesome death, and symbolic of the male bashing. So, Starfleet Academy. I got halfway through the episode before I decided to shut it off. I saw the first episode of Strange New Worlds. That got me about 3/4 through, and my memory is fading on that one, but son of a gun, this is just bad writing. What made me shut it off is I was watching the scene where you have the 2 girls show up and they're suddenly friends. You have the naive one, then you have the older one. They shake hands weird. They're like one's a hologram or something like that. And so they have the girls are really friends and they're nurturing each other, and they have a nice mirror character dynamic going on. Then you have the marauding males who bully the gay Klingon. And I need to shut this off. This is not doing me any good as a person. This is not doing me any good as a man. Here's the male bashing moment. It's a little bit earlier in the scene. They're on the prisoner transport ship, and let me get that. And as you can see, that this is sort of bad, but you can see the cattle prod to the groin area. Cattle prod to the groin area. Yes, boys and girls, the cattle prod to the groin area is in fact a castration image. Okay, so they're doing a castration image. Men are marauders, girls are sweet, and sunshine and light. It's not doing you good as a man to watch this stuff, so just shut it off. It's bad for you. It's screwing up your mind. Cattle prod to the groin. Swallowing the communication badge. Why a writer would do this is they're putting it in. They want to do character development, character growth. So here's this fresh young cadet who's so stupid she swallows a badge. Later on, she becomes admiral. And that's just sort of her character arc. However, any sensible group, you have an admin who swallows their comm badge. You get them out of there really quick because you don't want them screwing up people. That's what Steve Jobs said when he talked about the bozo explosion. You have a job, you have a workplace, you get one bozo there. Pretty soon, everyone's a bozo because this one person lowers a standard for everyone. It makes lower quality actions acceptable. And you get people like that who are that stupid, they wouldn't even pass the test. Holly Hunter, it's interesting because she's very petite. She has a very mellifluous voice, but she has a lisp, so it sort of cancels it out. You know, she did the voice for Elastigirl in the Incredibles. That's another male bashing movie. You see it in the second episode, the second Incredibles, where the father can't take care of a kid and he's just watching Johnny Quest, or the mother's out taking stuff. It's a role reversal again. But the male bashing you see in this episode, it's just part of this broader pattern of lethality, this pattern of male bashing, pattern of contempt for men. Contempt for men, keep that phrase. Gender relations in this series. Of course, the first one, you have Captain Kirk and Janice Rand, Grace Lee Whitney's character, who was various reasons why she is cut out, budgetary harassment, whatever have you. But you have that relationship. Captain Kirk's, the womanizer, which was done really badly in the J.J. Abrams. They made it a joke, and it just wasn't as subtle as it was in Star Trek. Yeah, the last episode of Star Trek TOS was season 3, Turnabout Intruder. That's where he swaps body with Janice Rand. And it's an interesting episode because it's sort of a funny setup, but this doesn't get quite executed. Actually, it's really negative towards women. I mean, women were barred from commands, and yeah, that's sort of a dumb idea, especially in the future. But it's about a toxic woman who went insane. Then you had Star Trek Enterprise. Now, this is interesting. Season 1, Episode 5, where you have Trip gets pregnant. Now Trip, he was a Texas person. He was the George W. Bush surrogate on the series. He was an effigy to be burnt, and all the hatred you'd had towards George W. Bush would be channeled through Trip's character. The problem is that Connor Trinneer, he's a very likable person. In fact, he was in the Stargate Origins, did a wonderful job with that. He was also in 24. He's just a very likable person that comes through with the character he plays, and it was just very mean and cruel to do this to him. Apparently he liked the episode, so if he's fine with it, my response is there's no accounting for taste. You do things for a paycheck, you do things to keep your job. Then you have Strange New Worlds, Spock Amok, also season 1, episode 5. Now, body swap episode, that's where you're scraping the bottom of the barrel. That's just when you run out of really interesting ideas, unless it's like the theme of the series, like Quantum Leap, but gender bending. And so you have Mr. Spock does a mind meld and swaps body with T'Pring. Now it's interesting because the mind melds and the whole Spock's engagement, that's always kept very secret and very private. As I did an episode about, so everyone thinks it was public knowledge. Well, that's not true. Mind melds. There's always saying, okay, we just don't like doing these things in public, and pretty soon they started using it in every episode. It's interesting because they're trying to feminize characters when you do something like that. for whatever reason, whether you don't like George Bush or you have this male bashing agenda. I tried to watch. I haven't seen any of Discovery. I don't do the streaming. I've got other things to do with my life, and it's more economical just to watch Pluto TV. But I started watching the first episode of Strange New Worlds, season 1, episode 1. I got about 3/4 of the way through, and I had to stop. The writing was bad. The transporter became a magic. Okay, you transport down the uniforms, you transport down with all the equipment on. It's just magic, magic, magic. It's not really science. And this is stuff that's before TOS, the original series. But they just use Spock as the butt of jokes. And there's the argument this is the younger Spock. It's like, well, Spock wasn't young. Spock's like 200 years old. It's kind of like Chewbacca. He's a really old person. Like Holly Hunter's character is like 400 years old. But even in the cage in Menagerie, Spock is an older, seasoned person. They're trying to make him as a goofball. Once again, is this character development, or is this just a very masculine person that you're doing as an effigy? I try and keep this family friendly, but Leonard Nimoy brought this up in his book I Am Spock, and he talked about for the BDSM fan fiction about Mr. Spock. Apparently, some of the ladies are kind of turned on by that stuff, 50 Shades of Grey. The reason why they like Spock is because he's so logical and just gets sort of this instinct in a woman that men don't quite understand. But it helps to have the awareness of it. So like I said, this is a pile of sick vomit we're getting from that, and you can feel it. We don't have to put up with it. The fans are showing it. So started with the critical drink. We're just making fun of it on the comments section, and I think they're getting the message now. Before I get to the alternatives, I'd like to talk a little bit about this broad-based male bashing, this contempt for men that's in the academic realm with the gender studies and women's studies. It gets passed on in popular articles, but also in the TV shows you watch recently. It's like it's not just the Force is female in Star Wars, Star Trek, Doctor Who. It's everywhere, and it's. I'm concerned about what it's doing to the psyches of young men, but it's also tied with this other aspect, and this gets a little bit of a sensitive area. Back in October 2006, President Gordon B. Hinckley, president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, he gave a talk in General Conference. And I actually happened to be in the conference center when he gave this. And he talked about this whole, it's 20-year-old data, but how more women are getting higher education than men. And so he just said, okay, men, you need to step up to the plate. And then here's the other thing that happened. This is in 2021. BYU did the post-George Floyd race equity and belonging report. They did this deep study analysis of BYU, and they came up with 26 action items. Good. The guy did a study, came up with a plan. They said it become a perpetual bureaucracy thing. And some of the suggestions would have scholarships. I'm going to talk a little bit about, let's go into a little bit deeper dive with this. This is what President Hinckley said. Remember, this is 20-year-old data. He said, Elder William Rolfe Kerr, Commissioner of Church Education, advises me that in the United States, nearly 73% of young women graduate from high school compared to 65% of young men. Young men are more likely to drop out of school than young women. Approximately 61% of young men enroll in college immediately following high school compared to 72% of young women. Now, it's interesting to keep the context of 19-year-old mission. Now, this is data not just for members of the church, but everyone in general, but think about young men going on missions. In 1950, 70% of those enrolled in college were males and 30% were females. By 2010, projections estimate that 40% will be males and 60% will be females. Women have earned more bachelor's degrees than men every year since 1982 and more master's degrees since 1986. It is plainly evident from these statistics that women are exceeding young men in pursuit of educational programs. And so I say unto you, young men, rise up and discipline yourself to take advantage of educational opportunities. Do you wish to marry a girl whose education has been far superior to your own? Now think about that statement, a man marrying a woman, and a woman's better educated. I have two friends of mine, they're in that situation. Their wives are doctorates. and they're both masters. We speak of being equally yoked. That applies, I think, to matters of education. So notice sort of the mixed messaging we're getting here is that women are are outpacing men, but is this outpacing or is this displacing men? Also think of the two with alternatives to education, taking a blue collar certificate approach opposed to a degreed approach. But what President Hinckley is suggesting is that, okay, men, you need to shape up, fly right, and take advantage of things and work within the structural system as we have it. And of course, dealing with situational realities. But isn't having more women educated, was that a goal? And does that entail displacing men to have more? You have a limited slots in the universities, so more women equals less men at a university. Now, with the BYU race equity and belonging, it acknowledged structural racism at BYU. Interesting, it never called racism a sin, saying this is something you need to repent of. It acknowledged it was a problem, but never called it a sin. Is that oversight itself a sin? Never called it, say, hey, if you're a racist, we want you either repent or you get out of this university. Never did that. So point 10 of the 26 items said, establish a new position of vice president or associate vice president of enrollment management and student success that is empowered to create strategic initiatives for recruitment, admission, scholarship, financial aid, retention, and student success for all students. That's particularly charged with leading initiatives associated with attracting, admitting, retaining, supporting the academic success of BIPOC students. Now, that was a word that came and went really quickly. Black, Indigenous Indigenous people of color is what BIPOC stands for, like DEI and ESG. 16, select prestigious scholarship recipients with a greater emphasis on holistic review of the entire applicant file, with criteria to include commitment to excellence, leadership potential, socioeconomic profile, adverse life circumstances, etc. We recommend a scrutiny of policies for determining scholarship criteria and their impact on BIPOC applicants. 17, create enriched environment scholarships honoring early BIPOC members of the church, such as Jane Manning, James, Elijah Abel, and others who have made available to students have demonstrated commitments to the values contained in the fostering and enriched environment policy. Create socioeconomic and disadvantaged scholarships in addition to existing need-based scholarships for students who demonstrate that they come from socioeconomically disadvantaged circumstances, who have faced adversities attendant to such circumstances, and demonstrate the need for financial support in order to obtain a BYU education. 19, create a process that allows students to report instances of racial discrimination on campus. Through this process, such claims could be investigated and redressed as appropriate. Now you notice the difference is that men were in conference. Men were told, okay, you just have to work within the system, and there's this hidden assumption that the system is fair towards men, and the problems of men aren't availing themselves to the system. But is that a correct assumption? Then you notice with the BYU REB, race, equity, belonging. Now, they're really good not calling it DEI because that caused a lot of baggage, but they called it that. So they said, we're going to change things at BYU to make it easier for BIPOC students. Vice president, academic vice presidents, which I think turned into the Office of Belonging. And then mentioned, 3 times I mentioned changes to the scholarship system and creating new scholarships for BIPOC students, and also creating a REB ombudsman. Now, you notice the difference. So what happens is that men said, okay, you just have to work within the system. But at BYU, men are disadvantaged in education. So disadvantaged men say just work within the system. Disadvantaged BIPOC, on the other hand, say, okay, we're going to make these changes to make it easier for you. So if you're a BIPOC male, you can avail yourself. You can grasp these things and get these scholarships. But if you're a white male, barring a need-based things, you're not going to have access to these things. Like I said, I was in the conference, and first of all, think about the difference. How it's working towards men, but not working toward it's not working towards men. BIPOC men can get access to these things, but white men aren't going to be able to get access to these things. I mean, it's sort of that things like if you're too rich, you don't need it. If you're too poor, you can get a scholarship. But what about the middlemen? If you can use this term, the white middle males in this process, what's happening to them? I bring this up because like I said, I was in the conference center when President Hinckley gave that, and I thought, well, first of all, this is really behind the curve. I knew this since the 1990s about what was happening to men in higher education. And my second thought was, well, you need to create scholarships. You need to create incentives to get men into school. Structural racism is real, and everything I say is in that context. Structural racism is real. It goes on, it happens. It's ingrained in the structure of the system. Jim Crow is real. Structural racism is real. But are we overcorrecting a problem? And the other thing is, not all white men are millionaires. There's no imaginary whites-only ATM where we can just go up there, tap on our PIN, and just take money out. You have to think in the context of the reason why men aren't getting higher education is because in this higher philosophic level, there's institutionalized male bashing. There's structural sexism against men. So for the past 20 years, remember this is President Hinckley from 20 years ago, in the 20 years he had more women getting into higher education. They're bringing the baggage in from the gender studies, the women's studies. This contempt for men is reflecting in the universities. This also happens with the BYU Law School. The past couple of years, the BYU Law School has had a majority of female admits. And just keep in mind, with law school or any schooling place where you have admits, you have the obvious admits, you have the obvious declines, but as you get to the center, it's not objective, it's really subjective because they all look alike. They all have the same pluses and minuses. And there's just a temptation to select in favor of females to get the bragging rights. Once you admit more women than men to BYU Law School, you can brag about that. It also helps with the external accreditation. There's this perception that because we don't ordain women, now we do set apart women, but we don't ordain women, that we're being sexist. So we make this concession. Well, we admit more women to law school and to BYU in general to compensate for this priesthood situation where women aren't ordained. We can actually call this the Camille Johnson effect, because this is the first time in church history that we have had the president of the church as a lawyer, and the president of the Relief Society also is a lawyer. Two lawyers running both the organization. Well, President Oaks runs the entire church, including Relief Society, but the church in general, then specifically for the woman. And you're going to see more women become lawyers because of it. It's sort of the mission president phenomenon. President Monson talked about this. If a mission president was a doctor, a lot of his missionaries become doctors. If there's a lawyer, they become lawyers. Whatever. Sometimes the people in the mission. So people look to Camille Johnson as a leader and a role model and start going to law school. And what's going on is a displacement problem. What does it mean for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints if BYU is producing more female lawyers than male lawyers? What happens to the men who don't get admitted? The men who want to become lawyers. Becoming a lawyer is a legitimate profession. It's also a legal way to make a lot of money quickly. I have a friend of mine who's about 10, 15 years younger than me, just called to be mission president. He can do this because he's a lawyer. What happens to these men who get displaced out of BYU Law School and they're foreordained to be bishops and stake presidents, temple presidents and mission presidents, or even general authorities? What happens to them? And if you say, well, God will intervene, well, when you read the Old Testament, God sometimes lets us suffer natural consequences. The case in point of the Book of Mormon is, you remember when they, I think it was with Alma the Elder, and it was with Limhi, how they went to war with the Lamanites, came back, and he had all these men killed, and they had all these widows. So God didn't bring the killed men back to life, said, okay, all these men died in the battle, you have to take care of these widows now. So what's your home teaching or your welfare situation to take care of the widows? You have to deal with the real consequences of your decisions. And BYU's making this decision, or the law school, to exclude men, or they're not admitting men, and we have to deal with the real consequences of that decision. Fewer male lawyers in the church who are BYU graduates. Now, they can go to law school other places, But like I said, this is a broad-based male bashing, so the same thing's going on at other universities. It's going to happen that you're going to have fewer male lawyers out there. And that'd be interesting. Now, that's the model. So let's double-check the data. Before you start going off, double-check the data of what I'm saying. Is that actually going on? Is there fewer male lawyers out there, or are there more male lawyers out there? It's this contempt of men that's on the rarefied level, on the university level, getting expressed in the admissions department, but also in the artwork in Star Wars and Starfleet Academy. Contempt for men. BYU has no place in perpetuating contempt for men, and is this affecting their admission process? And is this affecting the entire church, where men can't become lawyers because we're getting displaced? So, 40 minutes about it. I'm spending more time criticizing it than I actually did watching the episodes. So, call for action. For Paramount, Skydance, Disney, I own stock in both views. And as a shareholder, stop the male bashing. Stop this contempt for men. You're screwing up my portfolio. You're creating toxicity in the world. There is hope. Here's some alternatives. If you want to see a show like Strange New Worlds, I recommend this book by Robert Heinlein. Look at that cover. Space Cadet. How is that? That's an exciting guy in a spacesuit. He's walking out there. And it's a similar premise where you have a little guy named Matt Dodson gets admitted to the Space Academy. And he goes through the training process. So if you want to see a Space Academy where you have a young person go through the academy process, a bit like Harry Potter going through Hogwarts, except this is a science fiction one, I recommend the book. I had the wonderful opportunity of reading this book when I was a little kid, and it was a good compass for me. Helped me understand my mission, frame things with my mission. Another one is Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card. It's a similar Space Academy feel. You may have read it, you may have seen the movie. Give it a reread, because it's going to fit. If you want to see something like that, Ender's Game and then Space Cadet by Robert Heinlein will fit the deal. Robert Heinlein wrote a bunch of science fiction novels for young kids. Had this other one. This is the cover we had, called Farmer in the Sky. His titles don't age well, but the stories are timeless. But you look at the cover, does that look just like Luke Skywalker? I thought my dad had these books. He had Space Cadet and then Farmer in the Sky. And it's like, that is Luke Skywalker. So I just jumped into it and read these books. There's hope. There's, if you want something like that, like Strange New Worlds, certainly give these a look. If you're an author and artist, the door is wide open for you to write something like Starfleet Academy. It doesn't have the male bashing. And don't sell yourself short. And don't ignore this opportunity, because the market is right for you. If a lot of people hate what Star Wars and Star Trek and Doctor Who and Stargate SG-1 has turned into, and that means there's opportunity for you for your new franchise. During my lifetime, when I was a kid, we had Buck Rogers, Flash Gordon, Planet of the Apes, 2001: A Space Odyssey, and you had Star Trek, and that happened before I was born. Since I was born, you've had Star Wars, Space 1999, Battlestar Galactica. Let's see, what else? Battlestar Galactica reboot. You could do reboots of Buck Rogers, Stargate SG-1, Farscape. These are all very different sci-fi series. They're not space operas. But you can write something that resonates with you and get your message across. The door's open for you, so you take that opportunity. You're 3 steps above average, and you can just work wonders with your artistry. You can deliver it. Now, as to BYU and BYU law, I don't have a list of demands, but I do think it should be something that should be looked into. Is this admitting more women than men? Is there some structural sexism going involved? Or white men being discriminated against? Is it time for white male scholarships? Remember, there's no magical whites-only infinite ATM out there. Just because I'm white doesn't mean I'm rich. And you know better. So, 44 minutes of complaining about a show that I only watched 30 minutes of. But it's time to talk about this, to raise these discussions about male bashing, acceptable male bashing. There's a bunch of books by some professors out of Canada called Spreading Misandry, Legalizing Misandry. Give those books a read. A lot of my attitude is shaped towards that, but also my personal experience with having been discriminated against. If you're white men, of course you've been discriminated against. 45 minutes, and that's the passing scene on the view screen. Scene with the eyes of faith.